Again, all for being here tonight. As all Biolabs conference, we'll run this in English. If there are any language difficulties, don't hesitate, we can translate as appropriate. It's really a pleasure for us to again start these conferences in person after 18 months of interruptions where we were running webinars and had the pleasure of seeing people on the screen. It makes a big difference to actually talk with people and meet old friends in person. So we're very happy to have you all here. This cycle of conference is organized by Biolabs and Servier, and I would like to introduce my friend Olivier, with whom we spent many a day planning not only this cycle of conference, but a lot of other activities on which you are going to hear some just now. Olivier, thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. I'll be very brief. Welcome to this, I believe, the fifth of our series of conferences, and actually the second in presence. So this is a very nice day for us to be here with you. Yes, indeed, we spent some time together with the Biolabs team to talk and to work on different projects. So there's this series of conferences. You may have seen in the press that we are also planning for a very specific hub of innovation alongside our new R&D center, which is under construction in Paris-Saclay. And that will be opening in 2023, end of first quarter. This is the plan today, and we make our best effort to stick to the plan. We'll have the opportunity to elaborate on that project, but we believe that is going to be a unique place for young companies to benefit from both the know-how of Biolabs and the expertise of Servier for their project. There's also another event we are working on. We have launched a series of masterclasses, which consist in 1 full week of training, talks, discussion, case-by-case studies, including some very specific discussions on the project of each of the companies that are selected. We are running our first one now. There's been one first day of introduction, and the 1 week is currently being planned for being in Boston. We'll see whether it's in November as planned or a little bit later. So this is ongoing, and be aware that there will be a second round next year with a call for application along the summer 2022. So after this announcement, I'll just leave you with Jean-Jacques and our very great panel that is present here today, and I thank you for being here with us. Thank you all.
So with this, I would like to introduce Emmanuel Voisin, who has been working in the field that is of importance to our companies, helping them with all the regulatory aspects, but also with market access. And without any further ado, Emmanuel, maybe you can give us some words on your parcours and how you got to create Voisin Consulting. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. And well, two words about my parcours, what I've done. I had worked, I have a PhD in pharmacology, and my first company was Servier. So for me, it has a lot of meaning to be here today. Then I happened to go to the US just because my husband had to go to Washington. So I worked at NIH, sponsored by Servier also. And while I was at NIH, I have met the people who were creating the FDA division of antiviral drug products. So basically, at that point, I joined FDA as a reviewing pharmacologist and toxicologist. And after that, I couldn't stay at FDA because I was promoted, and I was not a US citizen. So I could not supervise Americans. And I left, and my former boss took me as with him, he became a consultant, and he put me in one of the companies he was working with. So I became in charge of all the regulatory work at a company called Buzyn Iscovisco at the time. And therefore, I was doing all the IND, and I didn't do any NDA at the time, but still INDs were pretty keeping us busy. After that, we happened to come back to Paris, and I worked with, started Quintiles, the CRO, which is now IQVIA in Paris, and started all of Southern Europe. At the time, they had Northern Europe, and that was it. And for a number of years, I was there, but I became a little bit tired about doing repetitive clinical trials, and I could see a number of people like yourselves, entrepreneurs who were brilliant people with very innovative projects that were crazy, and I was tempted by this adventure. So I started my own company to become a regulatory and product development consultant. My first project was a cell therapy company, and since then, that was almost 25 years ago now, we've been developing the company along three major areas. First of all, the types of products, health tech, drugs, medical devices, combination products, borderline products, and so on. And the other axis for development was geography. My first goal was really, as soon as I could, to set up an office in Cambridge that you saw just before, and then it was followed by other places, including Lausanne, Switzerland. And at the end of the day, the third axis is simply, but very interestingly, the regulators themselves, because when a new regulation is being thought by the even higher, the political power, and then goes to the regulators, then we were there to not only nest this new idea, but also sometimes participate in the working groups that created the regulation of tomorrow. And that's wonderful because it's a lot of fun, and you can apply what you hear, what's in there, to the products that you're developing. Anyways, here we are, and I won't say more. What I'd like to do is to throw a few slides here to prepare for the workshop that we're going to have. And I have put together a couple of very pragmatic, very simple slides just to make you think about questions. And we were talking with Christophe 5 minutes ago, and the funny thing is that you'll see a number of things that you just said. So he is the one who applies all this. So first of all, if you're going to go to the US, then of course you need a US agent, a local representative in the US, who will be interacting with FDA and who will be leading your interactions, because of course it's a team effort, but you will be working with this US agent who is your regulatory partner. You can also plan, and of course pre-IND meetings are very, very often recommended in the case of innovation, because in innovation you don't find everything in the guidelines, and you need to obviously add, there's a dimension that is not found in the guidelines that you need to bring to the FDA. The third one will be plan your preclinical carefully, your animal, the non-clinical in general, carefully, because you need to have a strong first in human dose, and you want to get it from globally the animal studies. And last but not least, and this is what blocks a lot of sponsors, is the CMC. So you need to have to think ahead, and we're going to talk about it. I have a full slide on this, but think ahead and discuss your development plan, which is most of the time not conventional, with the agencies. So if you're preparing for an IND, what are you going to put in there? Many sections that are of no interest here. But the two most important ones are the CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, and control, and the non-clinical data, mostly pharmacokinetics and toxicology, toxicity studies. Because what the FDA is going to assess on an original IND is nothing but other than the safety. And safety is their only concern. Even if they think your product is not going to work, they don't care. At this point, it's just safety. And that's the reason why when I was at FDA, we approved vitamin C for AIDS because, we approved an IND, not the drug, because we knew it was not going to be the drug to fix the problem, but the safety was good. And the clinical section, as much as your clinical protocol is of importance, the clinical section is secondary to the safety itself. And you will also provide what's called a reviewer's guide. And in fact, this reviewer's guide will contain information about how the sponsor has addressed the point that were mentioned by the FDA during the pre-IND meeting. And this is important because you want to show the FDA that, yes, I came to you, you gave me advice, and I'm taking that into account to design my protocol or to prepare my IND. So it's very important that you put emphasis on this so that the reviewer's life is made easy instead of having a big pile of documentation and not knowing how to navigate in there. And something that is also important is the letters of authorization for when you're cross-referencing to other documents to an IND, like a DMF, for example. And this can be and has been, in our experience, a reason for clinical hold. Clinical hold meaning FDA says no to your IND. Talking about clinical hold, here are a couple of other reasons that we find very often, we see very often, and it's a result of what we said before. Insufficient non-clinical, insufficient CMC data. The FDA makes their informed assessment on the risk, to de-risk, to not put the patients at risk. So by definition, if these data are insufficient, you will have a clinical hold. And this is probably the most frequent one. Another one that we see pretty often is a clinical protocol that doesn't contain the exact expected safety monitoring. For example, if you found some kind of liver toxicity in animals, then what the FDA wants to see is a strong monitoring of the liver function in humans. And this is not always well done in clinical protocols. So, of course, it would expose the patients to unreasonable risk, and it won't work, clinical hold again. But another cause that I really mention is arrogance from the sponsor. In fact, sometimes you see those sponsors walking, and you prepare them in advance, so you have rehearsed, you have done it all. But they come and they say, we know better than you do to the FDA. So, of course, they know their product much better than the FDA. But in terms of development, in terms of reference around the product development, the FDA knows a lot. And this is something that they don't like, and sometimes, boom, you find a clinical hold. And also, you have CEOs who come to FDA with, they think they're here to sell, to promote their product. So they spend the whole hour talking about their product, which is totally inadequate, because that's not the goal. The goal is really to listen to FDA, as we're going to see in a minute. So during the pre-IND meeting, a couple of practical recommendations. Obviously, you are in innovation, so by definition, you do have questions that are not answered in the guidelines, in the regulations, and therefore they're legitimate. You want to ask them. However, some sponsors would come and ask questions, and the answer is in the Code of Federal Regulations, so that doesn't work. You only ask questions that are related to issues that are new, in fact, that have not come up before. Rank the questions in order of importance. This is serious because if you start with, in a linear manner, CMC, non-clinical, clinical, and then you don't have time to finish, and clinical was your most important topic, then the meeting may finish. Sometimes you get a little supplement, but if the meeting ends, then you won't have the answer. So ranking the questions. And then planning in advance, because everything takes more time than what you think. And obviously, if you miss the deadline for sending your briefing book, then the FDA may cancel. So this happens, we've seen it, a couple of times, where the meeting was canceled due to delays in sending the briefing book. A couple of tips for successful pre-IND meetings. As I said earlier, listen to FDA, and they give good advice based on the experience with other products in the same category or that have similar characteristics. Be very polite, don't interrupt them. We've seen that also. When you are face-to-face or even in a telecon, it's important to pay attention to body language. Check on them and have one person in your group who only takes notes about the body language. He did this, he did that, he did this, and write it down. That is important when you debrief. Of course, now with the written response only, it's pretty hard to do anything along these lines. I wanted to insist also on the preparation, the rehearsal. You have to run a mock meeting a couple of times with the one person who is the among your participants who will be running the show, and in general the regulatory person who will say, you respond to the question, you respond to this other question, and then you can even play with mock FDA group who will be asking questions, just to rehearse and make people be familiar and be able to answer quickly, efficiently. And as opposed to what people think, don't be a yes man. The FDA is strong, they know what they want, but it's also possible to challenge them. And I think this is very important because in some cases, you really need to obtain what you want. And I don't know if it's whatever negotiation, you're sure that you're based on science and science is strong, then you have to defend your argumentation. Even if they didn't read it as much as you would have liked to in the briefing book, you need really to challenge. The discussion is possible, and sometimes they end up laughing at the fact that you discuss. So this is important. Now, I'm going to stop for a minute on CMC because obviously CMC is the most important by far and is the area where the difficulties are by far the most important ones, more than whatever you can think of. It's always topics that come up. So first of all, there's the design of the strategy in CMC with a CMC development plan that is done very early. You can change it afterwards, but if you start planning at the very beginning of your idea, then you will have a real strong basis to work on. And of course, you will put the key milestones of your development on a target product profile, or even better, a detailed quality target product profile that will start from the very end of what you want to reach, a product, a final product, and then come back to where you are now. This allows avoids to wander around, because if you're going to go forward, you may go this way, this way. Here, you're sure that you will be going forward straight to the goal if you start with the goal and bring it back to you today, now. So that's the most important thing, and not everybody does the quality, the QTPP. Then, of course, you have your various batches to produce. That you have the non-clinical, the toxicology, and the GMP. Everything has to be planned, especially if you, in some cases, you have to build a factory, or the manufacturing site will be dependent on the production will be dependent on a new manufacturing site. Most of the time, of course, you will be using a CMO and a DMO, development manufacturing organization. And be careful, because these days there is competition. With the COVID, they are really late. So they will give you a slot for 1 year from now, and that's not a good thing. So you have to be very careful with this competition. And release testing and characterization is also very important. That is something that you have to anticipate and plan with your experts. And analytical tools are to be created in some cases. And obviously, but I'm not going to talk about that. We have an expert here. Viral safety is definitely the key point for biologics. And it will be viral clearance validation will be assessed by the FDA with a lot of care. So in fact, if you want to de-risk, and this is what we were saying earlier, if you want to de-risk your CMC, it's important that you share all the weaknesses and not the strength, the weaknesses of your dossier with the FDA, while demonstrating that you have a good control over the weaknesses, and that little by little you will fix them. So basically you're telling them, look, I'm not good here, but I will become good, and this is how I'm going to become good. So that's key. And in terms of, it says preclinical here, this means the animal, well, everything that is toxicology mainly, so relevant species. First in human dose, very important. It has to be determined with a lot of care and a lot of thoughtful experts around the table, because you need so many expertise around this. It's in fact translating the preclinical data, taking into account the way the species are responding. And obviously, you have to discuss the metabolism, because if there are differences between the targets in different species, then this has to be taken into account. Disease models, a real difficult one that is not always resolved. Then you have obviously the PK. You can do modeling, and this is key also, because if you can compare through the PK, then all your data becomes totally usable. And again, you have the problem of CROs not being available, especially in US and Europe. So think about Asia Pacific, in particular China. You have good CROs there. Preclinical CROs, I mean, here. And one point also is carcinogenicity studies are decreasing. That's one thing. We have less and less cases where they're really wanted by the FDA. But it's always a matter of discussing and quote-unquote negotiating with them. And sometimes you can obtain one species instead of two. And an important point recently is the nitrosamine risk assessment plan. Impurities in general are scrutinized, but nitrosamine more than anything else. And I think that's it.
Can you say why nitrosamine in particular?
Don't ask me.
Okay.
I know that, ask Jean-Hugues maybe.
Well, we can come to that then.
Yeah, it's a matter of toxicity, it's toxic. So since it appears in many, many products during the manufacturing process, then they want to make sure that you have little nitrosamine. And if you have too much, then you have to do a risk assessment. But I'm not a CMC person by far. This is extremely technical.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Before you go, I would like to, if there are any questions directly on what Emmanuel just said, the questions would be very welcome now. We are going to, after the questions, come to a round table and have an occasion to have the whole discussion and continue to explore this subject, how to get to the IND, but on the specific point that Emmanuel just made. Yeah, sure.
Hello.
Hello.
You mentioned the TPP and QTPP. Is this something that you usually suggest?
Sorry, yeah, thank you.
Is this something?
Can you repeat the whole question so that
Yeah.
we can also take it? Thank you.
I was wondering if regarding the TPP or QTPP, is this something that you usually suggest to share with the agencies and with the FDA in particular? Or
Yes, not only we share, but we use it.
So maybe by the mic will be next.
Yes, we not only we share, but we use it sometimes as a communication tool with the FDA. So it's the common ground that we have together to speak about the development. So yes, more than yes.
thank you.
So Emmanuel, you mentioned earlier that there are some good CMOs, CDMOs also in China. What about the regulatory? Do you have any comment for the FDA or the NSM for the package they can deliver also?
The package
Yeah,
to be delivered to
from
China.
the Chinese company.
Ye-
In terms of regulatory and the fact that they match exactly to the requirement from the FDA or for the NSM.
Ah, okay. Yeah, well, it depends, you have it all. Some Chinese are doing exactly what they should be doing and can deliver to FDA and EMA, but some others are far from being there. So there's a variety of companies in China, So
there is a risk, right? That's a major concern because when you go through CDMOs, CMOs, you really need to have a good partner. And there's no concern they can deliver the product. However, for the regulatory package, that's also very, very difficult to assess if they can, be in the right track and deliver what is really needed.
You're talking about CMO, CDMOs, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. For the GMP production, yes.
We don't have much experience with production in China. We have more experience in preclinical CROs in China, and which are good.
Yes.
CMO, I don't know. Maybe our group, our chemists can talk to you about that, or our CMC people, because I don't think we've produced a lot, with our partners in China. But there must be good and bad CMOs,
I think it's a very important question. I completely agree with you. You have to be very, very careful. I mean, there are a number of CDMOs in China who fulfill the GMP, European, US GMP regulations and have been audited by the EMA or by the FDA. So, I mean, that's the way you need to go on it. If GMP-like doesn't exist, you're either GMP or you're not GMP.
Yeah.
And so you need to audit the facility, and they need to be GMP compliant and fit the regulatory landscape that you're going to do your clinical trial in.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions on what was just presented? If not, I would invite all of you, because we're already starting to have the panel discussion, so I would invite all of you to kindly get on to the next stage. we're very, very fortunate, I think, tonight to have this panel of very knowledgeable experts. So I would like to ask you to self-introduce so that I don't do any mistakes. I've been known to do that very often. So rather than keep doing it, Professor Trouvin, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good evening, and my pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm Jean-Luc Trouvin, recently retired from academy and hospital, but part of my career was also to be member of the review boards for the EMA, but also for the French National Agency, and particularly regarding the CMC and non-clinical aspects for biological products.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
So Jonathan Kersey, been working in France now for about 20 years. One of the companies that I initially started working for, I think, was probably Emmanuelle Voisin's first company that she worked for when she got back from the States as a consultant. So that's why my hair's so grey. I've been around for a while as well. Currently, co-founded about 13, 14 years ago, a company called L2D. And the objective of L2D is to really help our clients take products from the bench into and through clinic. So we provide services in a way similar to Voisin, but we're a little smaller, considerably smaller. And what we can help do is put development plans in place, but also deliver those development plans to help you in an operational aspect with all the pharmacology, toxicology, safety pharmacology, CMC, regulatory, quality assurance, and then sponsor oversight going into the clinic. So that's easy to say. It's a lot of big words, but quantitatively, what can we do and what do we do for our clients? Well, we speak to the regulators, whether it's the FDA, EMA, or national competent regulatory authorities, roughly once a month for our clients. So having scientific advice or pre-IND meetings with them. And roughly about 5 or 6 clinical trial applications are filed, or INDs are filed each year for our clients. So we're not a biotech, but if we were a biotech, I think it would be a pretty impressive rating in terms of delivering that in terms of products. And that's what I love doing. That's what I've done all my life, is develop products in a number of biotech companies before starting L2D. And it's really that wanting to move, I think, as possibly as Emmanuelle said, from developing one product at a time to developing multiple products at a time. And that's what's really exciting. And I couldn't do that in the biotech area because there was never enough financing. So one of the reasons I started this company was that I wasn't satisfied in developing a single product. I wanted to develop multiple products. And I had one choice. I had 2 choices. I could either go and work for Servier, or I could start my own company. So I chose to start my own company, and that's a project which is ongoing and really exciting. So I'm very pleased to be here as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. It's great to have you, and a lot of experience, as you can tell, is on this podium. And Christophe, so you have gone kind of the other way. You have delved in depth into, most recently, at least one product, but I don't think that's the whole story.
How to start? Well, so Christophe Godin, I am the CEO and co-founder of Autolysis, and yes, we started with one single product, which is a product dedicated to the treatment of patients with hemorrhagic form of stroke, which is the most severe one, and requires a treatment because it's an unmet medical need. Nothing is available yet for this form of stroke. And what we develop is a thrombolytic agent, which has some specificity in terms of formulation. I was particularly interested to hear again about the CMC, which is a critical part for us, of course. Not the only one, but one important part, which allows to have a slow delivery of our thrombolytic agent when it is administered inside of the brain, where is the clot, so that the clot can be eliminated through this, what we call minimally invasive surgery process. So with this product, we have actually enhanced technology that we can also use for other products. That is the reason why I was saying we start with one product. I will probably not have not have as many products as you have touched with. This is what I did in my previous life when I was in the large industry. I have been, for instance, in a number of years at Sanofi, where I was responsible for development of cardiovascular and thrombosis drug, which has a link, of course, with the technology we want to address with optolysis. And yes, at that time, I addressed a number of products, and that was another part of my life, which gave me a lot of experience, and that's good for what I am doing. But of course, as a CEO, it's another experience and something quite exciting that I am facing now.
So, well, thank you all for being here. And following up on that last comment, Christophe, I remember we met probably 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was. Who is counting? I know.
Yes.
But
if you're not.
you were coming to Boston. You were meeting with key opinion leaders that were really that had designed the previous trials that got some drugs in this field approved. And that was 5 years ago. And as I understand it, it's fairly recent that Optolysis is now interacting with the FDA. You have gone through your pre-IND meeting. And it's what happened to get there? It seems to be so long. And how did you prepare to get to your first interactions with the FDA?
Well, that's two different questions, I guess. Well, it's always too long, of course. And as you can imagine, we rely a lot on the ability to finance our programs, which is one of the difficulty. When we started, people were thinking, well, stroke, don't even think about it. It's too difficult, nothing works. And the world has changed here because there have been some success in some area of stroke, at least in ischemic stroke. And we benefit actually from the clinical experience that you just mentioned, Jean-Jacques, which has been which is a study that has been presented at the International Stroke Conference 2 years ago, where there is a potential benefit of this type of compound. Alteplase, which is an old drug and a compound which has the indication for the other form of stroke, which is the ischemic stroke, was tested in an investigator-driven study and showed that there is a potential benefit, but the drug was not sufficiently effective. But what has been clearly shown is that if you have the ability to decrease the volume of hematoma with an agent of this nature, you have a clear relationship with benefit, a clinical benefit in terms of mortality and decrease in disability. And this is what is exciting because we have the clinical model. We can rely on this endpoint of decrease in volume of the hematoma, which means that with a relatively small study of maybe 50, 60 patients, we are able to make a demonstration that is sufficient to expect a successful phase 3 or maybe even an early registration because of unmet medical need that we are facing.
So it's interesting to me to hear the contrast in what Emmanuel was presenting initially with a very strong focus on safety, going all the way to saying the medical data is maybe less important. You spent a lot of time on the medical aspects and understanding the best indication, the best way to move forward. And I suppose it's not so much a question as a comment that everything is going to be driven by the application and the way that the product is going to be able to have the effectiveness that you hope in the patients.
So this will be the clinical demonstration that we will try to do. In terms of safety, we have this advantage of having another product which has shown the safety of a procedure and the use of a thrombolytic agent the way we want to use it. With our product, which has a potential to be more effective, maybe less product or at least a slow delivery of the product, which will provide actually more safety plus some specific aspects of our product as well. So we are relatively comfortable with the safety in terms of clinical. No, and it is exactly what you said. Well, that's the second part of your question. Yes, we submitted a pre-IND package, and we did that despite the time which is flying always. We did that at relatively early stage. When I was in the large industry, we were usually submitting the pre-IND package just 1 month before we were able to submit the IND package, just to show that we did our job properly. Now, because of the complexity of what we are trying to do, and it's in terms of CMC, in terms of preclinical safety, because it's a local administration in the brain, and not everybody can do that in terms of toxicology package. We had to address different questions with the FDA, and that is the reason why we decided to have this meeting relatively early. It was a written response only, which was for me a bit frustrating when I heard that it was like that. And actually, I was very pleased to see that we could get a very complete answer to our different questions. Really, a cahier des charges for us, which is a way to de-risk our project, actually. So we are actually quite happy with what we obtained through this procedure of pre-IND package and receiving this letter from the FDA.
So I'm listening to everything that you, Emmanuel, and Christophe has said, and you have worked in the field for a long time and have in previous lives already put pre-IND or IND, pre-IND meetings, IND packages together and filed those. I'm trying to imagine my own company that we started recently, and Jonathan, this question is going to come to you, but I don't necessarily, it seems that in order to be able to even have a pre-IND meeting, you need to have been in the industry before. You basically need to have done it before. How do you even start, Jonathan? You have a lot of experience with a lot of companies with all the INDs that are being filed. So it's how do you even choose a regulatory person that's going to help you with all this? I suppose is the other question.
I think that's one of the difficulties. I think if you want to buy an iPhone and go into an iPhone store, you know what you're getting, and you'll pay whatever 800 euros for it. With a regulatory consultant, I'm sure Emmanuel will agree with me, you don't know what you get until, let's say, 3-6 months after you sign that contract and you've gone through the pre-IND process. You only know at the end what you're going to get, like constructing a house in a sense. So you need to build that confidence, and the consultant needs to build confidence with you. And to frame, I think Emmanuel said some very, very wise words in 7 slides, and she's actually talking about the next 2 to 5 years of your life if you're developing the product. And so look at each line that she's written on those slides. It's very obvious what she's written, but think about how that applies to your product. It's really, really important. So it's preparation, which is absolutely key. It's defining where you want to go. I don't know if any of you actually managed to go on holiday this year, but I'm sure none of you left without booking the train, the plane, or the hotel that you're going to. That's exactly what Emmanuel said. Put the target product profile in place. So know what you need, not what the end game is. Know what the clinical objective is. Talk to clinicians. You may have the best product in the world, but you may not be developing it in the best indication for that for your product. So talk to people, talk to clinicians, talk to other scientists, get that information, get it from wherever you possibly can, talk to everybody. And that is really, really key. And then preparation is absolutely key for where you want to go. You're not going to have all the pieces of your jigsaw puzzle when you talk to the FDA for a pre-IND meeting or any other regulatory authority in a scientific advice meeting. They know that. They don't expect you to have all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. What they expect you to do is to have a plan and explain to them how you're going to deliver it. And that's really what is essential. So what have you done and what you plan to do and how you're going to get there? And I completely agree with Emmanuel when she says, don't hesitate to challenge the regulators. They're there to look after the safety of the patients, but they're also there to help you develop a product. And I have always been hugely impressed. These people don't think, and I think Emmanuel's probably said it a little more subtly than I will say it, don't think these people are stupid and you can pull the wool over their eyes. You can't. They're extremely intelligent, and that's why they're there. They've developed a huge number of products which you haven't, and they have that knowledge. And but they're there to help you. And they will tell you things which could save you 600,000 euros. They can really advise you. I mean, we've been to scientific advice meetings where we've argued that for this product there is no good animal model, and we've justified it scientifically in regulatory terms to say that we don't think there's a toxicology model available, and we can justify not doing a toxicology study. That won't fly for, let's say, 85-90% of products, but we've done that recently for a product which was a peptide, which was to induce an immune response. The agency are very comfortable in terms of the safety aspects of peptides. They're synthetic molecules. That's easy. That's possible to do. But every product is unique, and you need to identify how you can get it into the clinic and whether there are any shortcuts you can take while ensuring both the quality and the safety aspects of your product. So I think planning is probably the answer to your question. And then Emmanuel's already told you that.
Right. Emmanuel and Jonathan, contrasting maybe what Christophe was saying, that at a big company, they have been through it. There is a lot of people who have a lot of experience. Pre-IND meeting comes pretty late in the process. Is that the norm, or do you see people, because of the availability of the agency, start to have pre-IND meetings earlier and earlier in the process? How do you see this playing out?
You can do your pre-IND meeting whenever you like. The problem with the FDA is normally you get one or a maximum 2 shots on goal. The difference with being in Europe is that you can talk to the regulatory agencies on a number of occasions. So the problem with the fact that you can only go once or maximum twice is that you need to plan when that is to get the maximum information. So that needs to be taken into account.
Not sure if it works, but yeah.
Same thing. There's no real date to go to FDA. You need to have accumulated enough points for them to answer. If you go too early and you go with 2 questions, it's not worth the big organization that this requires. So you have to have accumulated, enough. Now you can also do a pre-IND meeting on CMC.
Okay, so I have heard about this, and okay, what about a pre-IND meeting? Tell me more about a pre-IND meeting.
Well, the pre-IND is mostly, well, in our case at least, it's mostly for CMC issues, because if your CMC is blocked, then you can't go beyond that. So we do it mainly with the 3 or 4 points that we have that are blocking in the development. That's it. But there may be other examples around, I don't know.
Maybe just to comment, at least in our experience, because we originally thought about having a pre-IND meeting and decided to have a pre-IND meeting after all, because our understanding was that the timelines were not so easy to get feedback. Actually, this type of meeting, to my understanding, is something that you can get when you are dealing with a CBER. But when you are dealing with a CDER, it's something which is more complex. And actually, what we are dealing with is a division of a CDER. And we are really wondering, actually, if there was this possibility. And we had the feeling that it was already too late, even if it is early in the process. And we wanted maybe to have a commitment that we would not have get with a pre-IND meeting, at least to my understanding.
I think the other comment is, very quickly, the other comment is that even if you're developing and you're in the clinic in Europe and you want to go to the US, still consider doing a pre-IND meeting, pre-IND meeting. And that's important. And we've seen a couple of occasions where one client had some very, very nice data with a biological product, and they'd gone through a dose range finding in the phase 1 and identified the dose for the phase 2 clinical studies, which was actually above any of the doses that they'd used in the toxicology studies, and that happens. And they didn't think anything of it. They started a phase 2 in Europe and then wanted to expand that into the US. Except when they filed the IND, the FDA came back to them and said, no, we're not going to accept this unless you've taken your preclinical tox studies up to that dose level. So if they'd gone through a pre-IND, they'd have had that warning 6 months earlier and been able to actually resolve that, because clearly the additional tox took 6 months. We had another client who was a small molecule, and they had a major metabolite. They did, again, gone through a phase 1 and were doing phase 2 in Europe and wanted to go into phase 2 in the US. And the FDA came back to them and said, no, what we want to see is specific toxicology studies with that specific metabolite. Even though that metabolite was present in the animals based on giving the initial product, which was metabolized, they wanted to see additional studies. So even if you are already in the clinic, don't think that that's going to fast track you into going into US IND. Talk to the agency, introduce your product, get guidance. And if there are roadblocks, you can address them early and not have that in the critical path.
So all of this, and Professor Trouvin, this one is going to come to you with your experience of the agencies. All of this, when there is Emmanuel said it, don't think that you can pull the wool over their eye. They have developed a lot of drugs. They have seen a lot of drug submissions. They know much more than you do. And yet there are a number of areas where the science is moving, and it's possible that your company is going to have something that has never gone through an agency before. And how do you do that? And Professor Trouvin, maybe you can contrast the European approach, the American approach. In that case, an early meeting, if it's a new modality that has never gone through a regulatory approval, I would think would be quite complex.
Well, in fact, first we have to distinguish two situations. The first situation is when you are going for a clinical trial for a well-known product or a well-established product. And so in Europe, the situation is different from the US, because in Europe, the clinical trials have to be decided and authorized member state by member states, instead of one single IND authorization in the US. And so the pre-IND discussion has to be taken place with the relevant authorities in the member states where you intend to have your clinical trial. So that's the first difference. But the common point is that you can, and I go to your question, you can discuss with the European authorities very early in advance with a new product. And why not also to take the opportunity of the parallel scientific advice with FDA and EU to discuss very new concept, very new model, for example, a product which has not yet been developed from both sides of the Atlantic, of course. And this is not an IND, but this is a scientific advice where you can put any theoretical question and discuss with both authorities so that you have the same development plan and the same recommendation. But clearly for the IND, all what has been said, I fully agree. I have less experience with the FDA system, of course, but I fully agree. You have to plan and to prepare and to interact with the authorities as soon as possible. FDA when you are in the US, or 1 or 2 member states if you are in Europe. But when your development is finalized, or at least your theoretical development plan is finalized, go straight to the EU EMA system to be sure that in the vision of a marketing authorization, your development plan is complete. And then you have the scientific advice and interaction with EMA. So that's not exactly the same timeline, I would say, but that's very important also to interact with the EU. And one point to go with what said Jonathan, in fact, be prepared also to receive different opinion from FDA as compared to what you have heard, and you have given 2 examples where it was a green light from the EU and a no-go from the FDA. But I have examples where this was exactly the reverse, of course. Maybe one last comment, if you allow me, on what Emmanuel said, and particularly on the CMC aspects. there is something missing, if I may, in a slide, regarding the CMC, and particularly for biologicals. This is the comparability issues. You have to develop your product, you have to develop your process, and we know that the process for biological products are very complex. And if you change the scale, if you have a scaling up, if you change your CMO in terms of production, be prepared in terms of comparability issues. And this is really something you have to think about at the very, very early stage, because we know that you will have to produce, I don't know, a few grams of a biological for your first in-man clinical trial, and then you will have to expand the scale, and you will have to adapt your process, and then the question of comparability. So that's indeed a true issue. I don't know how FDA is discussing these aspects, but I can tell you that at the EU level, that's one blocking point, very important.
Same at FDA for sure, yeah. I'll add it on the slide.
Thank you. I will have more questions, but are there any questions from anybody in the assistance? I certainly want this to be as interactive as we can have it. Come on, don't be shy. Question from the panel.
Perhaps in that case, I could ask the audience a question. Can you just put your hands up if you're developing drugs? Are you developing biological products? Anybody? Small molecules? Okay, there's a lot of people who are just thinking about moving into this, and so yeah, I think that's a very, very important point in terms of the difference between a biological and a product and a small molecule. And that's that characterization and the analytical methods that are required. And there's a word that probably I certainly don't like, and Emmanuel probably doesn't like, and that's potency and potency assays. And they're the most horrible things in the world, where you have to be able to demonstrate the activity of your product. For a small molecule, you don't need to. A small molecule, you know the structure, you can define the structure using analytical methods. And it's a chemical process, so you can get that. But when you're using a living system to produce your antibody, your recombinant protein, or whatever it is, that is a level of complexity which is not a log, it's not 2 logs, it's probably like 25 logs different to a small molecule. And so you need what's called a potency assay, which measures the efficacy that you're seeing of your product in a human being. And many people are developing systems now which are fairly complex, so they may have a targeting part of their protein, they may have a functional part of the protein, and they may have even other parts of the protein. So there may be multiple activities. And to build a potency assay which measures all those activities is extremely difficult. And it's something that you need to think about early, because it's of the analytical methods, and it's the most complex. And certainly for a biological product.
Professor Trovan?
Just one short comment on the potency assay. The good news is that you can have one, preliminary potency assay to be developed for the phase 1, for example. But if you wish to change the potency assay, then you will go back to the comparability question. And how do you compare a batch with a different potency assay? So you see the tricking system.
So help me a little bit in terms of agency groups classification, because we hear a lot about small molecules, and that's CDER. We hear a lot about antibodies or biological molecules, and that's going to be CBER. And now there are all those cell therapies, exosomes, things which are not a molecule, which are big things. Are we going to have, I don't know, the CTER, the cell therapy? How is this organized? And when you have very new products in the way that they are prepared, and the modality itself is new, is that CBER? Maybe Professor Trovan, I suppose.
To my best knowledge, the balance between CDER and CBER is permanently moving. They have changed the definition of what is a drug, what is a biological at least 2 or 3 times in the last 20 or 30 years. Very recently, they have recategorized the peptides and proteins as biologicals. That's very recent. For sure, the gene therapy, cell therapy, tissue engineered products are considered as a CBER, biological product, although there is a special bureau at FDA for addressing the cell and gene therapy. In Europe, that's far more simple because you have the definition which are proposed in Annex 1 of Directive 2001/83. So that's very simple. And whatever the type of product, chemical, it's the quality working party, biological, it's biological working party. So there is no distinction in the EU.
Yeah, and on CDER, you have all the drugs, including some of the biologics. On CBER, you have allergens, vaccines, cell and gene and tissue engineering, as Jean-Luc was saying, and blood products. So you have those 4. In fact, it's the most complex biologics that goes to CBER, and CDER inherited the recombinants and quote unquote the easy, but they're not easy at all, biologics.
So how much of a relationship? I mean, the people who work in those various offices are well known. How much of a relationship can you get with them, or do you even get there, or do you not know? Do you have to? Okay, Christophe, yeah, you. You're doing it right now. How much do you know about the people at the FDA that you presented to? I understand it was frustrating because it was only a written exchanges, but still, are there real people behind the email?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. Well, for this division, it's a neurology division, so I didn't have the opportunity previously in my previous life to deal with them, but what I have seen is that, well, we decided to have a presentation. It's not necessarily required, but I think it's certainly a good thing to have a presentation in a CTD format, because it helps actually for the reviewing of the documents, because each reviewer knows where is his part and what he can expect to see, and then you have an answer, which, as I said before, for us it was pretty clear, and that's what we are looking for. So I don't think we really created a relationship because we didn't have a discussion, we didn't have a teleconference or a face-to-face meeting like I was used to. Now, what we decided, and I think that it was a good way to do, and maybe a recommendation here, is we were very transparent. And as you said, we are not talking only about what was easy and didn't require any concern, but we are also talking about what was more difficult and related to our indication, related to the mode of administration, related to some specificity of our formulation. So this is the type of thing where we wanted to address things, and whether the things were easy or not easy to interpret, it was part of our package. So for me, I think it was a way to create a relationship in a transparent way, and to so that we are trustable, basically. And I think this is something important. Then I had a previous experience with cardiorenal. At that time, it was called that way a lot because of involvement in cardiovascular and thrombosis. So I met very often with the same people. It was good. It was a very polite discussion. Well, it was not something friendly for even despite we met a number of times. Actually, I developed sometimes some more friendship with some people when they got retired and they were consultants with us, which is interesting because I think everybody has behaved according to his function. That makes sense.
And maybe I can quote an example that we had recently before COVID, of course. We were going with a sponsor who had a drug, an indication. We were going with a modeler who was to do a model-informed drug development. And we were doing the regulatory part. And then we went to FDA like, we'll never get them to accept that we put virtual patients in our clinical development plan, but we want to say it, we want to talk to them. And they gave us the meeting. Then after the meeting, they were really very, very interested, not by the drug and the indication, not at all. They were interested by the model and how we would calibrate and validate the model. And they said, come back, we'll go not to with the division, but we'll go to the MIDD, Model Informed Drug Development Group, which is made of the former the existing clinical pharmacologists, plus, as they said, geeks. And they call themselves geeks. And they asked us to come back and come back and come back. And we were going every 2 months. And every 2 months, they would check with us that we had reached the milestones. And it was wonderful. The only problem is that the sponsor went out of money. So and COVID came and we had...
you had to stop that.
Yeah,
So
but we have other ones now.
Can you, all of you probably, comment on the research activities of the FDA? Because the names CDER and CBER, the R's at the end stand for research. So is it only the research of the sponsor? One of the differences that I have seen, I think, in a previous life when I was working in a biotech company in the US, is that ability that there are, I think, but maybe I'm wrong, groups within the FDA that actually do research.
And they publish. Yes, they do research and they publish. And I remember an international meeting for a biological issue we had with immunoglobulins, for example, and I was really impressed to see some FDA members presenting their own results in terms of testing, in terms of developing potency assay for the immunoglobulin, and so on. And yes, indeed. And they are performing some research 1 or 2 days a week, and the other days they are performing some scientific advice and meeting with sponsors. So yes, for the European system, that's a little bit different. In fact, as you know, at EMEA, this is only the coordination of the scientific review, and the experts are from the 27 member states. Okay, but part of these 27 member states, and I can take the example of, at that time it was the UK, no longer now in Europe, but in the UK, some members of the Biologics Working Party, so the experts in terms of biologicals, were members of the NIBSC, which is the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control, and they perform research, of course. Members of Polar-Lake institutes are indeed scientists, and they perform research, in addition to providing some evaluation and assessment. So yes, indeed, in the regulatory bodies, you may find and you may discuss with very, very good scientists.
So it's, please comment afterwards also, but it's very common with researchers that you will interact with researchers. Now, if those researchers are at the FDA, can you actually interact with them? I mean, how much of a tight relationship can you get with folks who are on the other side of the barrier?
As sponsors, no.
But as scientists, it's okay.
Not well. A scientist who works in academia could get in touch, definitely, yes. But as a sponsor, you don't talk to them. On the other hand, yeah, they redo some of the experiments that you're presenting, in some cases, especially in CMC, dissolution tests, things like this. They will redo them in their labs to check your data. Just like the statisticians will redo the whole analysis by themselves to make sure that they have the same data, or they will use a different statistical method to see whether they would not obtain something different. So they have the luxury to redo a lot of what the sponsor submits.
John,
I mean, just to echo what you said, but at some point you were saying that it is important to listen to them because they know things that you don't know. And I think this is a particularity of the FDA, to my understanding, and I've seen that for other situations in cardiovascular, but because they accumulate the information and the data of different products, different sponsors, they make their own analysis, which are actually helpful for them to evaluate further some new drugs. A typical example is the QT. I mean, the discussion on QT has been very long and was based on many sponsors providing information and data to the FDA so that they could make their own judgment of what was useful, even if it's a moving target because things have changed in between. But I think this is a particularity of the FDA, that they are really at the edge of knowledge and try to they do their own research, but on a specific thing, actually, which is to get information from different products and to have new ways to assess the new products that may come afterwards.
I think one of the things to take into account is that there isn't a barrier. We shouldn't think about that. What the difference between the EU and the US is when the FDA gives us information, it's binding. So they need to think a little more seriously. If you go and have a scientific advice meeting in Europe, the first thing they'll tell you is that it's not binding. And that's quite strange when you go into a meeting and the first thing they say is it's not binding. And there's a good reason for that. It's because you haven't got all the pieces of jigsaw puzzle, and you certainly haven't got them in the right places. So they can only say yes or no to a clinical trial application when you file that application. But in the US, that's more binding. But you can discuss with them, but unfortunately, my experience is that you have 59 minutes, 59 seconds, and no more in a scientific advice meeting. Madam Vozen's obviously got more pressure on than I can. So, it's a time limitation thing. So it's a very much, as was said in the presentation, keep your presentation down to the shortest can possibly be while introducing the product, and then listen to what the authority has to say to you, and you can challenge them. And if it's a video conference you're having with the FDA occasionally, and I've been in those sorts of meetings where they put you on hold because they've listened to what you've said. If you say, well, I think we can do this differently, they've listened and they've come back after a minute or so and said, well, okay, we discuss it with us and we agree. So you can have that sort of interaction with them. And I think it's a time limit. And the different ways that you can have FDA meetings, so you can apply for a pre-IND meeting. They can say no straight away, they're not interested. They can say yes with a written response. They can say yes, we'll have a TC, but they'll provide you with a written response within 24, 48 hours of that meeting. And they'll actually ask you then if you want to stop your meeting. Imagine that you're in a perfect world and the FDA agrees with everything you've said. There's no reason to go and meet them, and you save them an hour of their time and perhaps 2 or 3 days if you're actually having to do the aller-retour to the US for that meeting. So there are very many different ways of doing it. So yeah.
You just mentioned that they might refuse to have a pre-IND meeting altogether. Why would they? What would trigger the refusal?
Mostly, and Emmanuel's already said this, because you're asking questions that they consider already covered in the FDA guidelines. I would guess it's the main reason.
Yes, just two comments on that. The first one is on the scientific advice, which is not binding, as you said. It is not binding for them, but it is more or less binding for you. So, just to explain that, if you put a question, please listen the answer, and if possible, follow it, unless you have very strong justification for not doing so. So that's in terms of binding for a scientific advice. That's very important, at least for the European system. And I cannot mention some examples, but I have examples in mind where indeed they did not follow the scientific advice comment, and at the end of the day, the product was refused at the marketing authorization level. So that's really a waste of time, for sure.
If there are any questions, please go right ahead. No? I do want to encourage questions, and So think of your question as I prepare the panel for the next thing, which is I think we can always learn a lot by mistakes and by the examples where people went into a wall. So I'd like to, because it's people don't talk about those things, right? Really, you want to talk about your successes, but without naming names, if we can see maybe a few examples that you have been able to witness of, gee, they should have done it differently. But before we go there, it will be, interactive is better. So any questions that the audience may have.
So can we talk a little bit about the cost, because it's free in.
I mean,
the question so that everybody can hear it.
it's working. So the question is about the cost. Is pretty much free when you go to NSM to ask for scientific advice. Is it the same in the US or elsewhere?
In the US, you don't pay anything, but you have 3 million expecting you at the end of the full thing. That is, to submit, it's going to be around 3 million this year.
In Europe, it depends on the member states. In France, as you have said, it is for free. At the EMA, and usually this is for scientific advice for the whole development and for the marketing authorization plan, of course. There is a cost which is depending on the number of question and section you are covering. Do you cover the quality section only, or the safety or the clinical? Then this is 30,000, 60,000, and 90,000 euros. Whatever the number of questions, it just depends on the section you are covering of the CTD in Europe. But clearly, if you go for a scientific advice in one member state only, be prepared to not have the exhaustive view of the European system. It's better to go to the EMA, of course. The usefulness of scientific advice at one member state, as you have mentioned, the INSM, is certainly valid if you intend to start a clinical trial with them. But if you intend to base your full development, clinical development, be prepared to go to the EMA, of course.
So coming to, everything is always going smoothly, nobody crashes.
I think that's called experience. Perhaps I'll start the ball rolling. I mean, we had a scientific advice several years ago now for a small molecule kinase inhibitor, and all kinase inhibitors tend to be cardiotoxic. So we went to the scientific advice. We proposed a standard toxicology package in two species, and then we suggested a standalone cardiotox study, which we thought was clear and was something that should be done because it's potentially cardiotoxic. And the authorities, they were actually the MHRA, so the UK authorities, so they're a little different than everybody else. They turned around and said, well, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, because the product is a kinase inhibitor and because all kinase inhibitors show cardiotoxicity. And they said, okay, well, what would you do if it showed cardiotoxicity? Would you stop the clinical study? And I said, no. I'd tell the clinician that potentially it was cardiotoxic and we'd do the study. Okay, and what would you do if you didn't see any cardiotoxicity? Would you do the study? I said, yes, of course I'd do the study. And he said, what would you tell the clinician? And I was forced to say, well, I tell the clinician that it's potentially cardiotoxic. And so he said, okay, well, what's the point in sacrificing 60 or 70 mice to do that study? He was right. I completely agreed with him. He'd saved my client probably 300,000 euros. Didn't do my pride a lot of good, but that's the way it goes. It's called experience.
So they can actually help, and
they are there to help. I think that's the important message. They're there to help. They're there to advise. They're there to protect patients or healthy volunteers, but they're also there to advance science and to bring products into the clinic and onto the market. So they're there to help. So listen to them. They're there to help you.
All right, another nugget of experience from the crowd there, please.
There is another negative experience from a company, and this is public, so we can even give the name of the product. This is Glybera, gene therapy products, which has now been withdrawn from the market. And their initial development, CMC development again, they were using a baculovirus system, and the advice of the EMA and the Biologics Working Party was to, at that time, the system was not so well developed and so well validated, and we made some recommendation. They did not listen to this recommendation, and at the time of the marketing authorization, they went up with a long list of commitments and obligation in their conditional approval, and unfortunately, they were unable to compare, of course, the results obtained with the first product as compared to the second product. So this is, again, a very bad experience for them, not having listened the recommendation from the scientific advice. And that's public.
Well, this won't be a regulatory agency, but a big mistake that a sponsor made once was to bring their product, and this is not trivial. We're talking about the first tissue engineering product that got brilliantly their MAA approved at the time, but they had totally forgotten that there's access to market and that you have to launch your product. So basically, they were not able to sell it because they had this MAA, and they had no price and reimbursement. So it went out of business. Well, not business, but the product was not marketed broadly.
Yeah, that's an issue which is a little bit different from regulatory, but is just as important, if not more. And seems to be, you don't want to do it sequentially, right? I mean, it's going to happen sequentially in real life, but in terms of planning, you don't have the luxury of doing it sequentially. You have to do both early.
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
Perhaps briefly to come back to the question that we had in terms of cost. I think there is specifically a cost for pre-IND, but there's also a consideration that you should make as a French company about going to the US or going to Europe for your clinical study. There are potentially very good reasons to go to the US. You may have a key opinion leader who's really excited about your product. That may be where the patients are. There may be very good reasons, but it's going to cost you more. It's going to cost you, ballpark figure, twice as much. Emmanuel's mentioned that you need to have a US representative. That's going to cost you. You need to go through a whole range of publication, which isn't necessary in the UK, in Europe. It's necessary in the US. The other difference between an IND and a CTA in Europe is that when you file the IND, you have to have all the final documents. So often you can finish your toxicology, your GLP toxicology study, but it takes months and months and months to get all those documents in place and signed off. You can't file your IND unless you have those documents signed off. So there's a gap in time as well. You need those documents in Europe as well, but they're not part of the application. They can be requested by the authority, but that could be later on. And then finally, my experience in working with some of the big US hospitals is they won't actually start negotiating. You can get the okay from a clinician that they'll support your phase 1 study in the US, but the hospitals say, Anderson, for example, they won't actually start discussing a contract with you for that clinical study until you've got your IND and it's been given and you've got your green light. And that means that your product has been produced, your clinical trial material is sitting on the shelf somewhere, and the clock is ticking. And like any yogurt or milk in the supermarket, it has a finite shelf life. And if you have to then wait 3, 6 or more months to get the contract in place to do the clinical study, that shelf life is being eaten into for that product. So there are many considerations. There may be very good reasons to go for an IND in the US. Unfortunately, the one that I'd like the least is financing, because you have a US investor, but may also be a real reason. But really consider those aspects in terms of cost.
Talking about MD Anderson, it took us 1 year to negotiate the contract with the hospital to start a clinical trial. 1 year.
Yeah, so those are not trivial matters, and reinforce the point that planning, whoever said that, is really essential for these processes. Unless there are any other questions, I think I would like to bring the panel discussion to a close and invite all of you to, I think I even have a slide here. Okay, so yes, please don't miss the next conference. And if you flash on this code, you will be kept up to date with what the next conference will be and when it will be held. So I will leave it there for whoever will want to do that. But please join us upstairs for a cocktail and for an occasion to exchange. You, I think, have been able to witness that there is a lot of experience in this room today. So I would really encourage you strongly to make the most of it and to discuss with our very nice panelists. Again, all of you, thank you very, very much for playing that game of question and answers and helping all the companies that want to go through that difficult process to understand it better. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So with that, it's really upstairs.